The first night Luna spent behind bars was not silent. Even though the world outside moved on, somewhere beyond the cold walls of confinement a storm had already begun, one that would consume not only her but every life orbiting her tragedy. Her pregnancy became both a punishment and a promise. Each beat of her heart carried a double rhythm, the fear of death and the fragile hope of creation. Yet, while she tried to believe that something pure could grow from such ruin, someone else was plotting to erase that possibility before it could breathe. That person was Katie. Katie had once been the emblem of maternal grace, the woman who fought for what she loved and carried her dignity like armor. But love, when poisoned by fear, can twist into something monstrous. From the moment she learned that Luna was carrying Will's child, she could not sleep. The thought of her son, her only son, tied forever to the woman who had humiliated the family filled her with a suffocating panic. Luna was not just an outsider. She was a reminder of weakness, a living scar on the pristine surface of the family name. To Katie, saving Will meant cutting away the infection before it spread, even if it meant wounding him forever. At first, she justified her obsession as protection. She told herself that the world was cruel, that it would tear Will apart if he became a father under such shameful circumstances. The whispers in society, the headlines, the pitying glances, she imagined them all as if they were already real. And so, she found a way to intervene quietly. Through an old connection from her charitable medical foundation, she hired a discreet physician, Dr. Halperin, a man whose silence could be bought and whose conscience had long since learned to obey the highest bidder. His task was simple on paper, yet monstrous in essence. Monitor Luna's pregnancy, report every sign of risk, and prepare for an extraction that no one must ever know about. Months passed in shadow. Luna grew thinner, paler, haunted by the ghost of freedom and the weight of a life growing inside her. The guards noticed her calmness, mistaking resignation for peace, but inside, she was unraveling. She could sense that something unnatural surrounded her care. The doctor's sterile kindness, the way he avoided her eyes when she asked questions, the way her prenatal vitamins arrived unmarked in white envelopes. She began to suspect that her body was being managed like a secret project rather than a patient's life. She didn't yet know whose hands controlled the strings, but she could feel the design tightening around her. Katie, meanwhile, grew colder. She had convinced herself that the coming birth was not a miracle but a crisis, and she was the only one with the courage to end it cleanly. When the time came, she visited the private clinic she had arranged outside the prison system, a forgotten facility on the edge of the city, where the flicker of fluorescent lights betrayed both decay and secrecy. She met Dr. Halperin in his office, a place that smelled of antiseptic and old guilt, and handed him an envelope thick with untraceable cash. Her words trembled, but her purpose did not. The baby would not exist. A stillbirth would be recorded, papers signed, signatures forged, and Luna would never know. The child would be removed that night and sent away, its existence erased before sunrise. But fate, as it often does, listened in silence and decided to intervene. The birth came earlier than expected, in a stormy hour when the power flickered and the world outside roared like judgment itself. Luna screamed not only from pain but from the echo of realization. This was no ordinary labor. This was an extraction, planned, timed, executed. Between the haze of contractions and the drugged stupor the doctor had forced upon her, she caught fragments of whispered conversations, a woman's low voice commanding something urgent. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. The cadence, the tone, it sounded like Katie. In that fractured moment, Luna understood what had been stolen from her even before her arms could hold it. When the baby emerged, Luna heard a cry, sharp, alive, undeniable. Her tears broke through the numbness as she reached out, but the world blurred and the sound was silenced by an injection meant to quiet her forever.
Dr.
Halperin did his work efficiently. Within hours, the false death certificate was prepared. the body supposedly cremated, and the infant smuggled away under the cover of night. Katie watched from the corridor, her hands trembling not from regret, but from the unbearable tension of conviction. She believed she had saved her son's life. She did not realize she had just condemned her soul. Luna never recovered. The infection that followed was merciless, but what truly killed her was the silence, the way everyone treated her child's death as fact while she knew she had heard life. Her body weakened, but her mind clung to a single sentence: "My baby cried." It became her final act of defiance. On the last night, as Will visited her, torn between love and resentment, she whispered that truth with a clarity that shattered him. The baby lived. Katie's name lingered in her breath, half prayer, half curse, and when she died, the room felt colder, as if something righteous had departed with her. For a time, Will tried to live with what he was told. He buried himself in work, numbing himself with charity events, speeches, and sleepless nights. But grief has a way of changing shape. It becomes suspicion, and suspicion becomes obsession. It began with a mistake in the records, a date that didn't align, a medical fee that shouldn't have existed. Then came the transfer receipts, anonymous payments from an offshore account bearing patterns he knew by heart. His mother's. He confronted her once, gently, asking about a charitable donation to a clinic that had since closed. Katie smiled too quickly, her explanation too neat. That smile haunted him more than any nightmare. From that moment, Will's love for his mother began to rot at the edges. He started tracing every thread of the mystery, moving through the underbelly of the city where secrets were traded like currency. What he found sickened him. The clinic had been quietly shut down after a scandal involving illegal adoptions, and the doctor had vanished abroad. But deeper still, in the financial trail buried beneath layers of falsified philanthropy, Will uncovered a series of coded transactions labeled under the name of a child welfare program, dates matching his supposed son's birth and disappearance. It was as if his mother had built a paper labyrinth to hide a single truth: the baby still lived. Katie, sensing the ground trembling beneath her lies, retreated into the illusion of righteousness. She prayed more, smiled more, pretending that faith could wash away calculation. She watched Will grow distant and feared that Luna's ghost was winning. In her mind, she was still the mother protecting her child from destruction, even if it meant being hated. But the line between savior and villain blurred until she could no longer tell which side she stood on. Every night, she revisited the decision in her mind, convincing herself that the child's disappearance had spared Will a lifetime of sorrow. Yet, somewhere deep beneath the layers of denial, a quieter voice whispered the truth. She had stolen not just a child, but her son's capacity for love. The confrontation was inevitable. When Will finally returned home with evidence, statements, bank records, photos of the clinic, he no longer looked like the boy she had raised. His eyes were colder, older, filled with the determination of a man betrayed by the person he trusted most. The house that had once been their sanctuary became a courtroom. Katie tried to defend herself, invoking love, sacrifice, and protection, but every word sounded like a blade turned inward. Will's fury was not loud. It was calm, devastating. He accused her not only of theft, but of rewriting destiny itself. Luna had died believing in her baby's cry, and now he would not rest until that sound echoed again. The more she denied, the more the evidence cornered her. And when the final piece surfaced, a letter from Dr. Halpern confessing his role in the abduction before his suicide, Katie's facade collapsed. She admitted everything, but not in remorse. Her confession was almost proud, spoken like a sermon. She had saved Will from scandal, from ruin, from a life bound to a ghost. What she didn't understand was that by saving him from pain, she had destroyed his capacity to heal. In the aftermath, the family's world imploded. The media feasted on the scandal, the law investigated, and Will disappeared for weeks, traveling from one orphanage to another, chasing rumors of a child that might be his. Katie lived like a widow of her own choices, locked away in the mansion that had once defined her power, now echoing only with silence. She replayed the past endlessly, seeing not evil in her acts, but the twisted reflection of love gone blind. In her mind, she was a tragic heroine. In reality, she was a thief of innocence. Months later, when Will finally located the child in a remote care home, the reunion was both salvation and punishment. The boy's eyes, dark, uncertain, reflected everything Will had lost and everything Katie had feared. Holding him, Will felt Luna's presence again, the echo of her dying words vibrating through his bones. But even as he vowed to protect his son, he knew the shadow of what Katie had done would never fade. Love, once corrupted, leaves a scar that even forgiveness cannot erase. Katie watched from afar, unseen, her heart torn between pride and agony. She wanted to reach out, to touch the child she had hidden, but she knew she no longer had the right. The very act she had believed would preserve her family had instead shattered it beyond repair. And in that realization lay the cruelest irony of all. In trying to save her son from a life defined by loss, she had ensured that loss was all he would ever know. As the years passed, the secret became legend, a story whispered in half-truths about a mother's crime born from love. But those who knew the truth understood that there was no clean division between victim and villain here, only people crushed beneath the weight of their own intentions. Luna's grave bore no child's name, and Katie's prayers grew quieter with each passing day. Yet somewhere in the child's laughter, faint and distant, there lingered the ghost of a woman who had died insisting on the sound of life, and the echo of a mother who would spend the rest of her days trying to convince herself she had done the right thing while knowing, deep down, that she never had. Under the collapsing weight of truth, Katie's world shrank into something unrecognizable. Her home, the marble floors, the grand staircase, the endless rooms filled with quiet luxury, no longer offered comfort. Every sound became an accusation. Every reflection in a mirror looked back at her with judgment. She had lived her entire life mastering control, over appearances, over emotion, over the narrative of who she was supposed to be. But control was a fragile empire, and Will had just set fire to it. For weeks, she refused to leave her bedroom. The servants whispered, the board members speculated, and the tabloids built their own versions of her downfall. Yet the only voice she truly heard was the one that spoke from within, the voice of a woman who had once believed she could bargain with destiny. She thought often of Luna in those days, not as an enemy, but as a haunting presence. Luna's eyes would appear in the quiet moments, filled with the raw defiance of someone who had loved beyond logic. Katie could not forgive her, not even in death, but she could not stop seeing her either. That final image, the frail girl whispering to Will that her child lived, replayed endlessly in her mind. It was not the whisper that haunted her, it was the conviction. Luna had died with more truth in her breath than Katie had in her entire life. And that realization hollowed her from the inside. Meanwhile, Will's search for meaning became his new religion. After reclaiming his child, he refused publicity, court settlements, or reconciliation. He moved to a smaller home near the coast, trading privilege for solitude. The boy, named Eli by his adoptive caretakers, was quiet and wary, with the same dark eyes Luna had once turned toward Will in trust. Raising him was both penance and redemption. Every sleepless night spent soothing Eli's fears became an act of atonement for all the nights Luna had spent alone. But the more Will devoted himself to his son, the less he knew what to do with his mother. Katie's attempts at contact were met with silence. Letters were returned unopened. Calls went unanswered. Once, she drove to his new address and sat in the car outside for hours, watching the lights flicker inside the modest house. Through the window, she saw Will kneel beside the boy, helping him with homework, his gestures patient and tender. That sight, more than any insult or accusation, broke her. She had wanted to protect him from scandal, but he had found grace in the very imperfection she tried to erase. The irony twisted like a knife. By removing Luna and her child, she had denied her son the one thing that could have saved him, love without condition. Still, Katie's guilt did not remain passive. It transformed into a need for justification. In her solitude, she began writing a confession, not for the law, but for Will. Page after page, she recounted the months leading up to Luna's imprisonment, the influence of powerful friends who had whispered that Luna's pregnancy would destroy the family, and the fear that had crawled into her bones. She wrote about the nights she lay awake, imagining the headlines, the donors withdrawing from her foundation, the humiliation that would follow. But between the lines of self-defense, her truth leaked out. How she had mistaken control for love, how she had treated her son's life as a chess game, and how she had learned too late that every move she made was pushing him toward the very pain she thought she could spare him from. When Will eventually received the envelope, years later, he read it with shaking hands. There was no apology at the start, only an explanation written in trembling script. He wanted to throw it away, to deny her one more moment of power over his emotions. Yet as he read on, something in him softened. Not forgiveness, but understanding. Katie had acted out of fear disguised as devotion. He realized that her cruelty was never rooted in hatred for Luna, but in terror that love would change what she understood as order. For the first time, Will saw his mother not as a manipulator, but as a prisoner of her own illusions. Still, understanding did not erase consequence. When Katie fell ill, an illness that spread through her like punishment, she was left with only her memories for company. Her body weakened, but her mind remained sharp enough to remember every decision she had made. On certain nights, she swore she could hear Luna's voice in the quiet, whispering forgiveness that sounded too merciful to be real. She began speaking to that phantom, confessing her regrets to the empty room. No priest could have absolved her better than that silence did. One stormy evening, Will came to her house for the first time in years. The sight of him standing in the doorway made her tremble with something between joy and dread. He didn't bring Eli, he said the boy was asleep. He had come alone, not to forgive, but to end the war between them. Their conversation was quiet, yet every word carried years of pain. Katie, her voice weak, tried to explain again that she had acted out of love. Will replied that love which destroys others cannot call itself love. He told her he had come not for closure but for truth. He needed to know whether, in those final hours, she had heard Luna's baby cry. Katie's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, admitting that she had stood outside the room, frozen by the sound. It was the first and last time she had ever witnessed innocence untouched by deceit. In that moment, something broke between them, not hatred, but the chain of silence. Will left without saying goodbye, yet Katie knew it was farewell. That night, she sat by the window, watching the rain, whispering a prayer for the child she had stolen and the woman whose courage she could never match. As dawn crept in, her heart stopped quietly, as if relieved to finally rest. When Will received the call, he felt no triumph, only a vast emptiness, the kind that comes when the last battle of a lifetime ends not with victory, but exhaustion. Eli grew up hearing fragments of the story, though Will shielded him from the darkest truths. But children have a way of sensing what words conceal. When Eli turned 18, he asked about his mother, and Will told him the truth, not the scandal, not the crime, but the essence, that a woman named Luna loved him so fiercely that her final breath carried his name. Eli wept, not for what he had missed, but for the beauty of a love so enduring that even death could not silence it. Years later, standing before Luna's unmarked grave, Will placed a single photograph, Katie holding him as a child, her smile radiant, unaware of the storm her heart would one day unleash. He realized then that life had not divided them into villains and victims. It had simply tested how far love could bend before it broke. He whispered that he forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because Luna would have wanted him to. The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of rain, and in that moment, Will felt something lift from his chest. The story of their lives had begun in secrecy and ended in revelation. Luna's cry had been real, Katie's sin undeniable, But within that tangled web of grief and redemption lay the truth about human love. It is never pure, never simple, but it is the only thing strong enough to survive its own destruction. And so, when he walked away from the grave, the morning sun breaking through the clouds, it was as if the world had decided to forgive them all, just enough to let life begin again.